This is the OAS podcast. We're talking about planning for 2024 budgets and forecasts, all that fun stuff. I'm David Christensen. I'm a senior director at Omega. And this is head of operations, Mike Catalano. All right, so budgeting and forecasting. It's an important topic. It sounds really big, sounds really complicated, but what's the value? Why should a small business in America worry about budgeting and forecasting?
Well, budgeting and forecasting, albeit not super fun for many people, I enjoy it myself personally,
Of course.
is super important because you want to set goals and actionable objectives as well as ways to monitor it and really create a measurable performance indicator for the business. This includes everything from revenue to costs all the way down into the profit line, knowing that it might not be perfect, but it is setting a direction for the company and the other folks in the business.
Is there a business that maybe might say, I'm too small to do this? Or is this something every business should be doing?
I mean, every person should probably be focused on it. We at home, we create a budget for the family. I think if that's the case, then every business should probably create a budget and a few estimates. The forecast is probably the harder part, and then the budget comes from the forecast. So there's certainly a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, especially this time of year, everyone's thinking, I didn't save enough money for all those Christmas gifts. Which credit card
That's
do
right.
I use?
Yeah.
No, so obviously that does make sense that businesses aren't thinking the same direction. There are going to be bigger consequences if they're not prepared.
Absolutely.
And we always like to assume the next year is going to be the same as every prior year, but recent history has taught us that we can't think that way anymore. Things can shift really quickly. Economy, the market, who's buying, what's buying.
Absolutely.
It can shift pretty quick. Okay, so if it's a big task, creating a budget, creating a forecast, how does someone start? Where do we start with this? What would you recommend? Step one, what are we looking at? What does that look like for a business?
So step one, I would recommend starting with the goal, right? SMART goal, making sure it's measurable, actionable. Really most people start with, what do I think I can generate revenue-wise next year based on the prior year's performance? Now, for a real small business, the owner might be the one to talk to, digging into the market and what's going on. For a larger size business that we've been a part of, you dig into the sales force. What's going on? What are the market trends? What are the sales? Is your business seasonal? Some businesses might sell the most during the Christmas season. Some might be in the summer season. So it depends on the products, the portfolio, and really the business. So it's a matter of collecting what you did for the last 12 months, analyzing it. I'd recommend actually doing the last 24 months. That generally allows you to pick up more seasonal trends, creates a little bit more variance so you can plan a little bit broader, at least from a forecast perspective. And then really projecting outward. The best-in-class forecast is probably 70 to 80% accurate, if that.
That's helpful,
and most people are probably not going to hit that. But the point is to set a goal and be able to measure against it and have actionable objectives to do that. And if you can tie your forecast to, sales, to measurable outcomes for the teams, you could then start to understand on a monthly basis, where did we win, where did we lose, and what do we need to change? And, that's what a good forecast is easily changed and adjusted, but ideally is always going up.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It all sounds like each industry might have its own nuance to incorporate.
Absolutely.
So whether that's business owner or some people with their boots on the ground kind of making those observations. If a business were to come back to you and say like, hey, I don't have, maybe I don't have easy access to 24 months worth of data. I mean, is there a spot where someone can just be like, I'm just going to go a 10% increase, or I'm going to anticipate X%? Like, is there ever a valid point to take some quote unquote shortcuts when it comes to revenue like that, or?
You certainly can. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. 24 months is tough to come by, especially in a small business. So certainly 12 months, understanding seasonal trends, understanding market performance. Those are all things that either somebody in your organization should learn, and or you could ask a consultant or ask somebody that knows the industry. Even some of your clients can tell you what's going on in there.
Cool.
Now, can you use a percentage and model it off of that? Some good forecasts are that way, but generally I'd recommend having a pretty dang good reason to use that percentage and have some data to back up and support it.
No, that's fair. And it sounds like, too, it's a good exercise to get to know your own business. I've known a lot of business owners that think they know how things are going, and they do this exercise, and they actually find out profitability's shifted. Expectation of revenue goals are not what they were expecting. Folks are giving discounts when they shouldn't be. All that kind of fun stuff. So that is just a good exercise to do. End of the year, thinking about how we can do things new in the upcoming year. And so, with that, New Year's resolutions are coming. Everyone probably thinks a budget or a goal like that. I'm going to for all this time, I'm going to set this goal. What would be some tips you'd have for maybe like how to set goals that make sense with what's coming up next year? What does that look like?
No, that's a good question. So I think as you start to plan, forecast, and budget, you need to tie to measurable, actionable things that your team or yourself are going to go and do. So if you think, using the percentage, that January your sales are going to go up by 10%, fantastic. In February when they went up by 5%, what happened? And if you can tie those to, well, we had 3 events and 3 sales and a discount percent of 5%, you can look at those numbers and go, well, actually, those events didn't turn out the way we wanted. We're going to do something a bit different in the next month. And that's where the adjustments really start to occur. Down on the budgeting lines and the cost lines, it's important to outline expectations. And a lot of times those budgets are tied to a percentage, say a percentage of revenue as you predict. Your costs are going to go up. A lot of times what I'd recommend doing is tying, say you have a 20-person organization, certain departments, and you need to start increasing revenue. How much revenue can your team produce today? What's your capacity? What's your utilization? If you're in a consulting world, it would probably be utilization. If you're a manufacturing or delivery world, it might be trucks or capacity. Starting to measure that, starting to understand that, and tying your percent of revenue for a cost to actual people. Is your revenue going up by 10% every month based on these actions? Well, your costs are going to go up that much. Do you have the people to even hit that? Then you can start planning earlier in the year for recruiting and other headcount increases.
No, that's great. I mean, that's, it feels like with a lot of budgets and forecasts, there's often this sense of optimism wins. So if we can just be the most optimistic possible, that's really the best approach to create a budget and forecast, and to make it more not to be Debbie Downers, but to make it more realistic, connected to actual things that can be done to get to those increases, makes a lot of sense, and also helps maybe a department that's working off a budget to connect with the owner who might have a different vision expectation for what should be happening, and just to use that as a communication tool as well not to negotiate, but to interact as things either go according to plan, or maybe shift. You kind of mentioned it a little bit, but just to draw in on that, what departments should be involved in the process? You've already mentioned a few. You've talked about sales. You've talked about kind of the boots on the ground, like the folks that are actually producing. What are some thoughts on kind of what departments should be included in this process?
Yeah, it's certainly a fine line because you don't necessarily want to include 1,000 people in creating a budget. You want somebody to own the budget, to lead the creation, but you want to bring in the correct individuals for each line. So revenue obviously needs sales, needs business development, probably needs marketing, so that you can tie each one of those pieces together. When you drop down into the cost line, you're going to need your purchasing department, your operations department. You're going to need to understand where those folks are at and if they agree. Typically what happens is the finance department will create a skeleton of a budget, and then you'll walk through it with each team and start to understand some of the nuances. Now, some things that don't typically happen is getting everybody, or at least the leaders, in the same room and going, what do you think, guys? Let's discuss. And really understanding what teams are at, because as many people know, sales and operations don't always align. And whether your company is big or small, that typically exists. So it's all about facilitating growth and having those metrics and meaningful actions to measure against.
Man, yeah, that I mean, personal experience, you see communication is always a matter that's being addressed. We're always thinking what are better ways the company can be talking overall, and going into 2024 thinking, okay, let's get the whole team, the whole company, key individuals, but all talking together, all going in the same direction, especially with a lot of businesses now having some of that hybrid aspects to their workforce. Folks not being in the office means some of these things aren't going to be communicated as well to the teams. Goals might not be the same. It might be a lot of hearsay through chats and through whatever. So the more business can do to increase that communication point at the front end of a year, especially, a lot of folks are going through some rough times at the end of this year. So really trying to plan and be ahead of that for next year. And that seems like a really, really smart thing to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think my approach to a lot of budgeting and goals, a lot of people say, well, that's too high, or maybe it's a little too much. That there's a nuance to then set realistic goals tied to standard performance, and then stretch goals tied to bonus performance. And if you have, your bonuses based on the profit you make, based on stretch goals, that means that, people make money when the company makes money, and it all ties well together. So tying your budget and your forecast to those meaningful, this is how the business should do, but this is the stretch goal we want to hit, and then setting your metrics to the stretch goal are certainly a good approach to make sure you always hit the goals.
Excellent, which kind of leads into, we've looked a little bit at where do you start, what teams are involved, how do you set some realistic expectations. So then you hit that with the metric aspect. What does a good cadence look like for a team to be reviewing this? Can you look at stuff too much? What are some of your thoughts there about what does that look like for a team to navigate with the actual the actuals versus what was planned for in the budgets?
Yeah, I think it does depend on each department. A sales team as a revenue metric really measures it, at most probably weekly, but a monthly target is typically what I see most companies do. Actually, here we have a weekly goal, right? Because we're weekly driven, and we enjoy that type of work. Whereas if you get down into an operational piece or an individual piece, people need to know what their goals are at a day or weekly basis. I've seen some companies build in hour-by-hour boards on a production floor that tie all the way up to their revenue goals. So tying that together, it depends on the business, and really you can't necessarily look at it too much. You just don't want to fall into the analysis paralysis window of constantly looking at data and not acting.
Yes.
So the key is set metrics that you can act upon, not metrics that are just informative, or at least be able to drill down into your higher level metrics to say, why did my sales not go up? Well, these were the actions I budgeted for or forecasted we were going to do. What was each performance, and how did we perform to that expectation?
No, that's great. That's really helpful. Yeah, it does feel like you get really excited about a budget and a forecast, and all of a sudden, everyone's just looking at an Excel doc or some sort of business intelligence dashboard.
Oh yeah.
And they're saying, we're not hitting it, but then no one has answers for what can be changed and different. So which leads into maybe one of the fears for business owners setting a budget and a forecast is, okay, I've done all this work. which I think we've established. There's value in doing the process that goes
Absolutely.
beyond just having a functional budget. Knowing your business, making sure everything's operating the ways that you intended it to. Everyone's on the same page, communication. So we have some value in just doing it that way. But what happens when when February comes and all of a sudden the market is completely different? Like how many plans do you have? How do you gauge for a plan B, C, D, Z? What does that look like?
Yeah, the perspective on that is to make sure that you're willing to adjust if needed. And you certainly have to run a business, right? You have to be profitable. You have to be able to pay for your team, your costs, your expenses. So it's important to review every month, at least how your performance was, and ask the question to the team, hey, this is how we did. It wasn't what we expected. What do we think we can do next time? Do we think, sometimes the sales team will go, well, it was just slower and we think that it'll pick up next month. Great, maybe you don't have to change. Maybe it's, as David mentioned, a complete market shift and we need to adjust, and the product A went down, but product B is skyrocketing. It's just not as profitable.
Yeah.
Okay, well then let's adjust and see if we can't do an improvement project to improve margin. So
yeah, and that I know it sounds scary, but to your point, we've seen with business owners, if you have a model and budget in place, though a shift like that is never a fun season to go through, it gets everyone up on edge. But if you have a basis to work from, it does allow for some we'll not say a smooth transition, but at least a smoother transition into an additional plan, however far down the line you have to go.
Yeah, and setting that foundation allows you to be flexible. So you set the foundation knowing that it's not going to be perfect, right? As mentioned previously, the best forecast is 70 to 80% accurate. And you know that if you do a percentage basis off of that, it's probably even less. Yep. But the matter of fact is, if you tie it detailed enough for actionable metrics, you can monitor those and adjust as you see fit.
That's cool. This has been helpful. Do you have, by any chance, a fun short story about some sort of budget forecast that you've seen either go terribly wrong and how the company learned from that and benefited, or how it went terribly right?
That's a good question. So
the answer can be no. I know you've done a lot of these, so I don't know if you can just pull one up out of.
I think I'll give it a shot here. So I did it was actually a very large forecast budget for an industrial distributor. And they actually had a few improvement projects they wanted to build into the budget. And each one of these improvement projects were pretty detailed. It was, again, $700 million, large scale, lots of manufacturing centers, distribution centers, and so on. So how do you actually budget for that? You know what I mean? How do you create a forecast? And what we found is that, a lot of their metrics had to be driven deep into. We had to pull in operations. We had to create subsets of teams that it was really a 2-month process with a couple of teams to build out, here's the foundation of what we did this year. Here's what it should look like with the changes that we're going forward. And these are the operational metrics that we're going to drive to make sure that happens. And although this is a successful story, we actually, it worked out. There were certainly some adjustments that needed to be made along the way. I think we looked at some 8 to 10 projects. We thought we were going to, do a couple of projects beforehand. I think they only ended up doing 4 or 5 of them, which again adjusted the budget. But they were able to look at a model, say those 5 are gone. This is what it does to the budget and the forecast, and this is how we should end the year. I think they were 10 to 20% off by the end of it. They adjusted a few times, but it was good.
That's cool. That's helpful. No, there's a lot to be gained from this process. I think that's been helpful. I know I've enjoyed hearing a little bit more details. I know we've talked a lot about this, but just to get some focus, energy on it, and so hopefully that's been helpful for our viewers as well. So check out Omega. We'll have some other content on this, but that's been the long and short of it. So
yeah, absolutely. Reach out if you have want to talk more.